Let's play a game. It's one of my favorite games. It's called Do You Want to Swap Places with Me? And here's how it works. I'm going to show you some clips from my camera roll, and you're just going to decide if you would like to switch places with me in those moments. Okay? Got it? Ready? Go.
Nice, she's got it. Oh! That was a bad one.
Okay, fine. But don't look. You're gonna get grossed out.
Is the nurse up outside put this?
Yes.
Sorry. That fin is still intact, you said, right?
Yes.
Can you please sit down?
Very good.
You're about to jump off that cliff right there. It's gonna be so fun.
Oh no. Hey, we have to complain about this. Wait, how much are we paying for this again?
75 a day.
37, 38.
And how accurate the shooting is?
Alright, crew.
Did someone say it worked?
It's not a good sailing trip unless we almost hit a crash.
Okay, welcome back. If you're anything like me, there are probably a number of those clips that you would not like to be teleported into in this moment because, truth be told, they were unpleasant or miserable at the time, but they are definitely fun to look back on in retrospect, and I'm glad that I did a lot of these things. If this idea resonates with you, then you're probably a connoisseur of Type 2 fun yourself, and if not, that's fine too. Because I realize, after talking to a lot of people about this idea, that it doesn't quite resonate for everybody. And there are a lot of people out there who consider fun to be categorically fun or not fun. And that's it. And I think that's really interesting because I had never considered how our brain actually takes something that was miserable at the time and turns it into a positive experience. And what other factors influence what we think of as fun and how the world incentivizes us to do hard things, because I think we all do hard things for totally different reasons. But at the heart of a Type 2 experience, the rewards are not so obvious. And if there's no obvious reward, then why are so many people drawn to Type 2 experiences, and why does our brain allow us to take something that sucks and turn it into something good? I'm going to unpack all of that, and I'm going to talk about what I see as two hidden benefits of what happened when you embrace Type 2 fun in your life. So sit back, relax, and we're going to talk about it. This idea of Type 2 fun originates in the outdoor community. I'm not exactly sure who started it. People attribute it to different people. But one thing's for sure, REI has their own dedicated page describing what Type 2 fun is. And a lot of people have talked about Type 2 fun in blogs and articles. They often bring up the fun matrix, which is just a two-pronged matrix of if something is fun in the moment or if it's fun in retrospect. To give some examples of each of these types of fun, we'll start with Type 1 fun. This is just pure fun. This is when you go to the amusement park, you go to the pool, you have drinks with your friends, you go on a vacation, nothing goes wrong, every day is sunny. Whether it's planned or unplanned, everything works out pretty well. But I think a hallmark of Type 1 fun, when someone asks you about how something went later, there's just not a lot to say. Maybe you just recount what you did on your Type 1 fun experience, but otherwise you can just summarize it with, yeah, it was good. Great. And you go your separate ways. And that's kind of how I perceive if something is a Type 1 fun experience or not. And then there's Type 2. I've heard so many examples of Type 2. I've heard that tattoos are like Type 2 fun. I think some people would consider having a baby Type 2 fun. A lot of people talk about any hikes, outdoor swimming, climbing, kayaking, biking trips, a really hard workout class or exercise, maybe even some really difficult mental challenge or puzzle that you're going through can be Type 2 fun. Possibilities are endless, but in contrast to Type 1 fun, the heart of a Type 2 fun is that it at least makes an interesting story, if not a funny one. If someone asks you how an experience went, you know it's type 2 when you have to take a deep breath before you can start talking about it. I think that signals to the other person that they're in for an interesting story. And then there's type 3 fun. This is just not fun. It could be traumatic even. Some examples of type 3 fun that come to mind are you go to the DMV and you wait for 3 hours. You get a big dental procedure done. You break your leg. And then a lot of other sad, dark things that can happen in life can be type 3 fun. There are some instances of type 3 fun that in the right context maybe could make an interesting story, but more than often they don't. And then there's type 4 fun. This is essentially all of our overindulgence tendencies. Or, just go a little too far with anything that feels good in the moment. So this can be going on a crazy shopping spree, drinking too much, eating too much, any kind of overconsumption. You binge watch Netflix. You were talking smack about people for a little bit too long and went a little too far. And in general, type 4 tends to bring feelings of shame and regret. So I think a fair criticism of type 2 fun is that maybe it's just like a coping mechanism or some sort of delusion that we tell ourselves to find meaning and purpose in something that was otherwise pointless suffering. Whether or not you think it's a coping mechanism or a delusion, it's still rooted in the brain. So how does our brain actually experience fun, and how could it be possible that something miserable could turn into something positive later? Big disclaimer, type 2 fun is not a formal area of research. I know, I was also shocked. Although there is one study I found that I think is kind of directly type 2, although they didn't call it that. Study followed a group that was on a 3-week biking excursion, and they just recorded how they felt during and after the experience. And even though everyone was kind of suffering during the biking trip, after 2 days, a lot of the people said that they would do it again, and they actually enjoyed themselves. So aside from that, there is not a lot of work done on type 2 fun per se. And another disclaimer, I'm not a neuroscientist or a psychologist, so this is new territory for me. But when I think of fun as a mechanism in the brain, I think it's most similar to the reward and pleasure pathways. And then when I think of misery as a mechanism in the brain, I think it's most rooted in pain, fear, and stress. So at root, the pleasure and reward systems are known as the mesolimbic system, which is largely dependent on the neurotransmitter dopamine. And when we experience something rewarding or pleasurable, the area known as the VTA, or the ventral tegmental area, signals to the nucleus accumbens. And dopamine doesn't just signal pleasure, it also signals anticipation. This is why just thinking about something can feel just as good as the thing itself. So I think this is why when you're doing online shopping, it can feel sometimes more exciting when you purchase the item and click checkout online than when the item that you ordered actually shows up at your house. And the reward pathway responds most strongly to novel experiences, which is also why we experience the hedonic treadmill. So if you do the same fun, pleasurable thing over and over, it's going to lose that spark over time, and then you have to chase more and more of it in order to get the same level of reward in the future. Misery, on the other hand, I would say is rooted in the amygdala. When we feel fear and pain or anything that's perceived as a threat, this will cause the physical sensations of stress. So in the case of pain, it's a physical sensation that eventually will transform into an emotional sensation of stress or fear. So we experience pain in the periphery with pain receptors, and eventually that signal travels to the amygdala, and then the amygdala will signal to the hypothalamus, which will signal via hormones to the pituitary gland, which then sends hormones to the adrenal cortex, and the result is cortisol and adrenaline. And while novelty can elicit the strongest response for the reward pathway, uncertainty and the unknown elicits the strongest response in the stress pathway. And this is backed by a lot of really interesting studies that I'm glad I was not a part of. As a demonstration of this, there is a study where participants played a game where they looked at pictures of rocks and they had to guess if there was a snake underneath it. And if there was a snake underneath it, they were also shocked. But throughout the game, the probability of there being a snake under the rock was changing. So they were pretty uncertain if a rock was going to elicit a painful shock. And when the odds were 50-50 chance of there being a snake underneath the rock, this is when participants had the highest levels of stress, which was measured through pupil dilation and skin conductivity, and also reported the highest levels of subjective stress. So this paper kind of draws a really strong link between an uncertain environment and how stressful that can be. But the one cool thing is that the people that were the most stressed were a lot better at learning. Stress seems to be an adaptation to increase alertness and give you an advantage at learning what the hell is going on around you. Not only does uncertainty and the unknown increase stress, but it actually acts the opposite of an opioid and can increase the pain that you're going to experience in a given event. In some of these studies, which I'm really glad I was not a part of, people watched the pain ratings from 8 other people that were exposed to a heat stimulus, and then they received the same heat stimulus themselves. And when other people's ratings were really spread out, aka there was a lot of uncertainty about how painful it was going to be, people experienced more pain from the same stimulus compared to when everyone's ratings were similar. And in another study, people that were about to experience an electric shock imagined a doctor describing how painful the experience was going to be. And if the doctor said, "I don't know," people reported the most pain, compared with other doctor cues like "it varies widely among people" and "anywhere from not painful to highly painful." So just the verbal cue of "I don't know" actually increased the pain of the same electrical shock. So yeah, pretty insane. We are so uncomfortable with the unknown and uncertainty. You've probably heard of this experiment where they put people in an empty room with a shock device, and people, almost like 80% or more, will opt to just shock themselves because they're bored, and sitting in a room for an unknown amount of time with nothing to do is so uncomfortable that they'll just shock themselves. Even when they have a shock device that allows them to do mild shocks instead of painful shocks, they'll just pick the painful one, which is insane. I mean, I guess I would probably do this too if I was in this situation. When it comes to memory, we still use these same systems and pathways to emotionally process something that's already happened. We also have a lot of natural biases and tendencies to view the past as better than it actually was. And this is generally known as rosy retrospection, which is our brain just downplaying the negative aspects about an experience and emphasizing or highlighting the positive aspects about it. I think a lot of us are also familiar with the feeling of nostalgia, which is a bittersweet feeling of warmth and connection to our past experiences, even if they sucked. The way we judge events in the past is also largely biased, and this is known as the peak-end rule. We judge events not based on how long or how unpleasant they were, but instead on how unpleasant it was at its peak intensity and at the end. This is why we're willing to do something that was difficult if it ended well. Like if you went on a really hard hike, but it ended in a beautiful view and a drink with your friends. At the end of the day, memories are not recordings. They're just reconstructions. And every time that we recall a memory, it becomes unstable, and it's at this point that we can encode new emotions into it using the same reward and stress pathways that we would use in the present moment. So there was a study done in 2021 where people were brought into the lab and asked to recall a negative memory and then to focus on some of the silver linings of that experience. And they were asked to come back to the lab a week later and 2 months later, and at each point they took brain scans to see which parts of their brains were activated. And they recorded new activity in the hippocampus, which is the memory center of the brain, and the ventral striatum, which is the heart of the reward center of the brain. So doing this activity of reassigning some positive emotion or some positive meaning actually changed the brain, which led to a new positive version of the memory. So they weren't just reinterpreting their memories, their brain actually restructured how the memory is processed. But it does take a little bit of time for this to happen. It doesn't happen immediately. It takes at least 24 hours for your brain to be able to reconstruct and reconsolidate something into a more positive experience. So yes, our brains are absolutely capable of restructuring something negative and turning it into something positive, and probably the opposite, which we're not going to talk about today. Whether or not you think that this is a coping mechanism or some kind of delusion, we're absolutely capable of doing it. So what else influences what we think of as fun and miserable? We live in a type A world, And in our type A world, there's a popular recipe for a good, meaningful life. It goes something like this. You work really hard and you do difficult things to earn rewards and pleasure, and you avoid suffering at all costs. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's it. And I think this recipe does have type 2 baked in. It's just a different flavor than the outdoor kind. Because we all do really hard, difficult things, but in the type A world, they're all kind of directly connected to some sort of reward. If you work hard at school and in your career, you get money and promotions. If you challenge yourself physically, you're going to get physical rewards. At the end of the day, the type A world does have type 2 fun baked in it. You do something hard, you earn a reward, and then you're glad you did it in retrospect. So I would call this type 2A fun, and it's the systemically approved version. These are typically controlled suffering that you could opt out of at any moment. They are encouraged. I would go so far as to say that type 2A is seen as a virtue in a type A society. And then there's the outdoor version, which I call type 2B, which is entirely based on uncertainty. These are things that we don't choose, they choose us. And when you're in a scenario like that, you can't just leave. The only way out of it is through. And another key feature is that there is no obvious reward to a type 2B experience. And I think the system influences what we think of as fun and what we think of as suffering that's worth doing. It's clear that we have a brain and we live in a world that is wired to protect us and prevent us from dealing with unknown and uncertain misery. And even so, a lot of us are still willing to engage in the type 2B style of type 2 fun. Are there any hidden rewards? We all know the feeling of when misery strikes. For me, my gut starts to sink, my heart starts to race, I will visibly cringe, and I start bargaining with some unknown entity about any possible way to get out of this situation, only to realize, nope, there's no escape. Good luck. So it's at this point that I have two options that I'm not always aware of. The first option is to suffer, and then this will turn into type 3 fun, probably, aka just misery. And then there's a second option, which is leaning into this unknown experience with some curiosity and intrigue. Because it's at this moment that you might realize there's unlimited possibilities on how it could turn out, and I'm just focusing on the worst ones. Let me paint a picture for you. You're in a competition where you have to come up with cool ideas. You have access to an entire craft shop for free, and you can make any kind of art in any category for any purpose. Alright? Okay. But you have some competitors, and your competitors are going to be limited in some way. One person will only have $20 to spend in the craft shop, but they can choose to make any kind of art for any reason. And then a third person can spend as much as they want in the craft store, but they have to make a 3D modern art piece. And then there's the fourth person. They only have $20 to spend in the craft store, and they have to make some form of wearable art. Wearable art. Who do you think would win? If you guessed person number 4, you are correct. In early work that studied creativity, there was experiments like this that suggested that all creativity comes through the same mechanism. Constraints. And the group with the most constraints on resources and on the problem subject consistently had more creative ideas than all the other groups when they were judged by a third party. At its heart, creativity is a cognitive problem-solving process. And when misery strikes, it will manifest as a constraint on resources or on the problem at hand, either shrinking the resources or shrinking the goalpost. But what do I mean? Well, let's think back on some more practical examples that we might have faced in our life. Have you ever been cooking something and you ran out of a key ingredient and your guests were about to arrive? Maybe you came up with a new recipe and it actually turned out pretty good. There you go. Resource constraint. Maybe you got the address wrong on your way to some event, and on your way you discovered a new coffee shop or a new town. I'm not sure if that's resource constraint or problem constraint, but either way, you discovered something new. When you have unlimited resources, and an unconstrained goal or problem, creativity is actually hard because the problem is just too ambiguous. And this can lead to feelings of overwhelm and frustration. And on the other hand, if you have extremely limited resources or a problem is like far too narrow, creativity isn't going to help you. And it can become a futile effort and lead to feelings of hopelessness and depression and anger even. But there is a sweet spot. When constraints are balanced, this creates a focused space and intention for creativity to emerge and to solve the problem at hand. And when we look beyond ourselves into the real world, we can see this everywhere. Some of the greatest innovations and creative feats were the direct result of misery just manifesting itself into our lives, and we didn't even realize it. Some of my favorite examples of this are in science, of course, but there's also a lot of great examples in cinema and film. And I first heard of these examples on Lo-Fi Cinema's YouTube channel. So if you're familiar with Breaking Bad, you might recall when Jesse relocates to Jane's duplex apartment, and this leads to a totally new plotline where he gets into a relationship with Jane. They relapse together, Walter allows her to die, and then her dad is so distraught that he causes an air traffic collision that affects the entire community of Albuquerque. And yeah, all of that happened because in real life, Jesse's house was being sold. So production had to create a totally new plotline for where Jesse was going to live. So that was probably incredibly stressful for producers at the time, but in turn, we got a really cool plot for one of the greatest shows of all time. And another really cool example of constrained resources is the OG shark horror film, Jaws. On the first day of filming, the mechanical shark broke, and Steven Spielberg then had to figure out how to film a shark attack scene with no shark. And so we were blessed with some of the most iconic camera angles showing a woman being dragged around by a shark from above water, and basically a shark POV just showing what a shark would see when they see their potential victims kicking around in the water. So we got little feetsies swimming around. As an example of a constrained problem, in the movie Notorious by Alfred Hitchcock, he had to create an intimate scene in a time where you could not kiss on screen for longer than 3 seconds. And so he transformed what would have just been a long kiss into a 3-minute scene which had 3-second kisses interspersed with walking and hugging and whispering, which turned out to be a much more intimate scene than if he had just done a really long kiss. And finally, as an example of a highly constrained problem with unlimited resources, DARPA announced the Grand Challenge in 2004. This was the challenge that pushed LiDAR technology into what it is today, that has enabled us to use autonomous vehicles. And the original challenge was to create autonomous vehicles that could travel across 142 miles of the Mojave Desert with no interventions. First year that people attempted this, the furthest vehicle only made it 7.2 miles. In the year that followed, almost everybody completed the challenge, and this led to a great advancement in LiDAR. Once this technology had become so advanced through this challenge, archaeologists finally decided that maybe this could actually be used in their work as well. And in 2009, a pair of archaeologists decided to use the LiDAR technology to map out a part of Central America to study some ancient Mayan ruins. And in less than a week, they collected more data than they had in the past quarter century of their traditional way of physically hacking through the jungle. This work revealed a network of 60,000 structures that completely changed the way that we understand Mayan civilization and basically revolutionized modern archaeology today. What strikes me the most about all of these examples, and I think the key insight here, is that all of these things were possible before, but it took the Type 2 push in order for the innovation and the creativity to emerge. I think Type 2 works on a personal and on a large scale, and it could lead to self-discovery or a new hobby or a new joy, unlocking some new ability that you had no idea you had in you, and just pushing you to see the possibilities that were always there, but you otherwise would never have tried them. The second hidden benefit is a little more elusive and personal, I think. When you look at the fun matrix, you can see that this is essentially two versions of you. There's present self and the future self. And because we live in the present moment right now, we probably relate to present self a lot more than future self. But if you can relate to the future version of yourself as a friend, I think this is an act of embracing the unknown. Because even though you don't know what is going to happen, how you're going to feel in the future, future. This is just an opportunity to accept the unknown. And this concept also has a name, which is known as temporal self-continuity. But if we're only talking about the future self, then it's just called future self-continuity. This is a characteristic that naturally increases as we age. It's a tendency to view the future self as a friend rather than a stranger. And the way that you view your future self tends to correlate with how you view others. So if you have a high sense of future self-continuity, you're more likely to be more warm and empathetic with other people as well. I'm not sure if engaging with type 2 fun increases future self-continuity or vice versa, but I think it's probably a feedback loop where if you already have a high future self-continuity, you're probably more likely to embrace a type 2 experience because you can see future you benefiting from it. Even though there's not really a lot of research on temporal self-continuity and type 2 fun per se, I think there is a lot of research showing that when you can relate positively to past experiences and when you feel connected with your future self, there are a lot of tangible and more abstract benefits. For one, you're probably going to have better financial and health habits. You'll probably have closer connections because, again, the way you relate to different versions of yourself correlates with how you relate to others. You'll be able to delay gratification instead of acting on impulse. And in the more abstract sense, I think this leads to a more long-lived version of pleasure, which is known as eudaimonia. And eudaimonia is the type of pleasure that makes us have purpose and meaning in our life, which, depending who you are, is a really valuable thing. When I think of this matrix chart and the present and the future self, I always think of the movie The Substance. Because Elizabeth has a terrible relationship with any non-present version of herself. And if you've seen the movie, spoiler alert, if you haven't, this leads to some really destructive behavior because she thinks of her present self and the other version of herself as like two completely separate people who are basically enemies. And they hate each other. And she still refers to the other version of herself as a different person, even though the substance people have told her from day one that
the one and only thing not to forget. You are one. You can't escape from yourself.
And because she can't really get this message through her head, it ends in a bloodbath. And on that note, Elizabeth probably would have benefited from a few of the practices that you can use to build a connection with your future self. And one of them is to write down characteristics about your present self that you think that you're going to share with your future self. This can be anything, like, I think she makes good food. I think she is on time. Or I think she's creative. Anything like that. Another practice, which most of us don't have access to, was found in a series of studies for personal finances. So people that are shown visual representations of an older version of their self are more likely to start saving money and investing. I think that's really cool. We see pictures of our younger self all the time, but can you imagine if you could actually see a picture of your older self? I think there was a filter back in the day that was like an older version of you. So maybe during that time, people started to save more money. I think it's also important to highlight that feeling connected with a future version of yourself is definitely influenced by the resources that you have. And if you're already healthy and wealthy, you're probably more likely to at least be able to envision a future for yourself than someone who is lacking those things and is just kind of living day to day. But my big takeaway of feeling connected with different versions of yourself is that you'll probably reduce the amount of type 4 fun in your life. This practice will enrich your type 1 and type 2 experiences, and it can probably dampen the suffering of type 3 experiences. Although this is just my hypothesis, I don't know if this will ever be studied. So the reality is, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, type 2 fun is headed your way, like some sick style of Bogart. But I really wanted to highlight two of the positive outcomes if you do choose to accept misery when it knocks on your door, which is that it can be a window to innovation, creativity, and self-discovery. And it can be a practice to promote harmony between your present and your past and your future self. And if you take any message from this video, I hope that it's this. We live in a world that's full of pressures and reasons to succeed and to strive and to try hard all the time. Type 2 fun seems to be the only part of my life whose meaning is solely determined by me, and that's it. And as someone who tends to reject difficult things and get really stressed and anxious by unexpected challenges, I need to remind myself of that, and that next time misery knocks on my door, I can just smile and say, all right, let's do it. I would love to hear your thoughts on Type 2 fun, your examples of how you think Type 2 fun has made an impact on your life. And when you do hard things, ask yourself, who are you doing them for? Because I think we all have a choice to decide that on our own. And as always, the research that I discuss will be linked in the description box below. So again, thank you for watching, and let's do this again sometime. This was fun. Nice job, Ben.
People like roast.
About to put it onto the grill anyways. I'm glad the others aren't here right now.